Hi and welcome back to my channel. My daughter and I went to the Slavery and the Bank exhibition at the Bank of England Museum, which explores the links between the Bank of England, the City of London and transatlantic slavery. The Slavery and the Bank exhibition is absolutely free and ends in April 2023. Please watch to the end, where I not only share my thoughts on this exhibition, but also other interesting facts discovered whilst researching for this video. How many of you knew this exhibition even existed? My sister showed me a 1-minute TikTok by Kane Kawasaki, and my interest was piqued. Seems like there is a direct link between the Bank of England and the island of Grenada, where my family is from. The Bank of England owned 2 plantations in Grenada, as well as 599 slaves. But we will find out more details later when together we walk through this exhibition. At the entrance, there is a screen which says, "This exhibition explores the history of transatlantic slavery through its connections with the Bank of England and the wider City of London." For over 300 years, the slave trade tore more than 12 million African people from their homes and families. In this exhibition, we reflect on how the wealth created through transatlantic slavery shaped the development of Britain. We had to scan our bags and everything. If you want an audio guide, you can scan the QR code. So I don't have a QR code on my phone, so instead they gave me the online link. I brought it up on my phone and I will do the tour from here. You can see where it says start the tour. I should add that they have free Wi-Fi, so everyone is able to follow the audio guide. So from beyond those doors, I'm not allowed to film, but I will take some pictures. Before you arrive at the Slavery and the Bank exhibition, there is a permanent exhibition on the Bank of England, where it tells its own story, from its foundations in 1694 to the present day. The Bank of England is the bank for the UK government and high street banks. Today, they print banknotes, they regulate the banking system in order to keep inflation stable. They monitor high street banks and they look after all the gold reserves on behalf of the Treasury. So now we move on to the Slavery and the Bank exhibition. It is a very compact exhibition designed in a round room. So let me take you step by step through the exhibition. As you approach the exhibition, on the left you will see this board with similar words to the one in the foyer. Additionally, it says, "Forced into slavery, they worked without pay and with no rights to their humanity, heritage, culture or family ties." The first piece of audio is an introduction explaining why this exhibition exists in the first place. In the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020, the Bank of England released a statement about its links to transatlantic slavery, and this exhibition is the result of research into the bank's links with transatlantic slavery. They say the research is ongoing and there are still many questions to answer and documents to explore. So the audio leads us to case number 11, and it asks the question, does gold contain traces of slavery? The object in focus is a gold guinea coin from 1694. They say that this guinea coin is a tangible link between the City of London and the transatlantic slave trade. Why? Because it got its name from the Guinea coast, which was the centre of the English slave trade in West Africa. It was made from African gold and transported by the Royal African Company, who also transported African enslaved people. King Charles II was the founder and a shareholder of the slave trading Royal African Company. His brother, King James II of England, was the governor of the RAC from 1660 to 1688. The audio then instructs us to look at the banners on the raised areas around the exhibition, which has portraits of governors and directors who back then were wealthy businessmen who invested in the bank. The bank has removed these portraits because of their connections to transatlantic slavery. These portraits have been reproduced for the sake of this exhibition. Next, we move on to case 9, a taste for sugar. The question posed is, do you think about where products come from today? Sugar in the 1700s was an exotic but addictive product, which is why more and more slaves were needed to keep up with increased demands. Some of these merchants did business with the Bank of England. The object in focus is a sugar spoon from 1743 or 4. This particular spoon was used by the Bank of England in their parlours and has the Bank of England inscribed on the back of it. UK boycotters of slavery would do so by not buying sugar, starting around 1780. Next we move on to case 13, abolition. The question posed is, should we celebrate abolitionists? It says religious groups such as the Quakers opposed slavery, and there was also an abolition movement called the Clapham sect. Apparently, the former governor of the Bank of England, Samuel Thornton, was a member of this group, the Clapham sect. The object in focus is a souvenir coin for a Jamaican slave called Amelia. She was an albino and she was brought to the UK to be toured around. She would be baptized, which she believed meant she was free, and she would leave her master and she would tour herself around. The exhibition says that Amelia's story was one of self-determination. Next we move on to case number 8, Humphrey Maurice. And the question posed is, can we tell the history of slavery without the names of the enslaved? The audio goes on to talk about Humphrey Maurice, who was director of the Bank of England 4 times, as well as serving as governor and deputy governor. Apparently, he had extensive involvement in the slave trade from 1704. He invested in at least 103 voyages, which accounts for around 30,000 African men, women and children who were forced across the Atlantic in his ships. The object in focus is a bill of exchange used in the slave trade from 1719. This section is making a point that we don't know the names of any of the enslaved. They were just numbers and were treated like mere cargo. The next case that we move on to is case number 7, financing slavery. The question posed is, did finance shape slavery? The audio tells us that to become a director or governor of the bank, an individual would have to own a large amount of bank stock. For some governors and directors, the money they invested included wealth generated slavery. We also learned that some of the Bank of England's customers were at the forefront of Britain's colonial expansion and involvement in the slave trade. These customers include the East India Company, the Royal African Company and the South Sea Company. The object in focus is a countermart coin for use in Jamaica from around 1757. The audio says that this silver coin was originally made for use in Peru, so how did it end up being circulated as a British coin in Jamaica? Well, sometimes coins would be given an extra stamp to show that they could be used as legal currency in different areas. On the coin, you can see the letters GR. This stands for Georgius Rex, or King George, and made the coin eligible for use in Jamaica. So next we move on to case number 6, after abolition. And the question posed is, was compensation needed to end slavery? So the slave trade was abolished in 1807, but slavery itself was not abolished in the British Empire until 1833. The fight for the abolition of slavery was a long one, and in the end, it was secured by the promise to compensate slave owners for the loss of their so-called property. Around 20 million was paid in compensation to slave owners. The Bank of England managed the payment of this compensation on behalf of the British government. The formerly enslaved received nothing. The object in focus is a dividend warrant, April 1836. This form was used by former slave owners to collect compensation payments twice a year from the National Debt Office through the Bank of England. This dividend warrant is a sample of those issued to slave owners with plantations in Barbados. Next, we move on to case 19, regional ties. How would the UK look without the slave trade? So regional branches of the Bank of England were established in the 1800s to provide banking services across the UK, especially manufacturing and commercial centres such as Liverpool and Birmingham. The regional branches supported the work of local merchants, many of which were involved in commercial activities relating to the slave trade. The audio says that no evidence has yet come to light to suggest that the bank's agents and sub-agents also had private business interests in transatlantic slavery, but that they do know that some bank directors had links to Britain's industrial heartlands and were intertwined with merchants trading and plantation slavery. For example, Samuel Hibbert was a director of the bank from 1819 to 37, and his family built their fortune on the slavery economy. The object in focus is Liverpool Southwest Prospect. This is a panoramic image which shows Liverpool as a thriving port, whose growth owed much to the transatlantic slave trade in the early 18th century. While London and Bristol were initially Britain's key slave trading ports, Liverpool began to dominate the trade by 1740 and continued to do so until it was abolished in 1807. This print from 1728 shows how Liverpool's docks developed in this period. There were 5,300 voyages from Liverpool to Africa between 1695 and 1807, compared to 3,100 from London and 2,200 from Bristol. Wealth built on slavery helped to finance local infrastructure like the Liverpool and Manchester Railway. The building of the railway was also motivated by the slavery economy. There was a need to transport raw cotton that had arrived in Liverpool from American plantations worked by enslaved Africans. The railway sped up the process of getting the cotton to mills in Manchester. In the raised area in the centre of the exhibition, here it's looking at the bank's forgotten plantations. It focuses on the island of Grenada, where my family is from. Today, Grenada is an independent island nation in the Caribbean. However, from the mid-1600s, it became a plantation colony under French rule, and in the mid-1700s was captured by Britain. In the late 1780s, the bank came into ownership of 2 sugar plantations and their enslaved workforce in Grenada. The plantations, called Bacolay and Chemin, had been offered to the bank as security on a loan it made to a business called Alexander and Sons, which subsequently went bankrupt. The plantations would subsequently be sold on to a merchant called James Bailey. So the object in focus is the inventory from the Bacolay and Chemin plantations. The audio says that recent research has uncovered a series of documents in the bank's archive relating to the bankruptcy of Alexander and Sons. The most impactful document found was the inventory of the Grenada plantations taken in 1788. It lists the names and perceived value of each of the 599 enslaved men, women, and children who were forced to work there. These lists serve as a powerful reminder of the people at the heart of this history. So next we move on to case 5. How is slavery visible today? Reminders of slavery. There are reminders of Britain's involvement in slavery throughout the country, including the City of London. For example, on the front of the Royal Exchange, you have to look up and look very carefully. There is a slave kneeling. Next you have case 23, which is conclusion and reflection. And in this area, they hope to start a conversation about the link between slavery and the economy. They also say that this exhibition is a snapshot of the research done so far into the bank's links with transatlantic slavery. We hope it's left you with a lasting impression and invite you to reflect upon your experience of the exhibition. So my thoughts on this exhibition. It's really weird walking through an exhibition talking about people directly related to me. The bits that stood out for me, at the start when they talk about slaves losing their humanity, heritage, culture and family, what they should have added is descendants of slaves would lose their history, their language and their names. History because we cannot trace our families back to Africa, which means we have no clue which country in Africa that we are from. We should also keep in mind that colonizers split Africa. They would create borders and name each country. We also lost our language because we were forced to speak the language of our slave owners, whether that was English, Spanish, Portuguese, depending on who the slave owners were. And we also lost our family names. Slave owners would name us as one would a pet. The next part that stood out for me is the fact that the Bank of England owned two plantations in Grenada, Bacolay and Chemin. Both my parents were born on the island of Grenada, so now this exhibition becomes very personal to me. Of particular interest was the inventory of slaves. Here we get to see the actual names of slaves. Granted, those names were given to them by plantation owners, but these are the names that we carry through to today. When I look at this inventory, I know there is a possibility that my own family could be listed in there. They also had the names listed above my head in the exhibition. There were quite a few surnames that I recognised. So the Bank of England sold the Bacolay and Chemin plantations to James Bailey. He would subsequently pass on the Bacolay plantation to his son Alexander and sell the Chemin plantation to Samuel Mitchell. We still have the village of Bacolay in Grenada. It can be found in the east of the island. The plantation's full name was originally Bailey's Bacolay, but today people just call the area Bacolay. The Chemin plantation existed in the parish of St. George's in the south of the island, and Samuel Mitchell would change the name to Hope Vale. There are no traces of the Chemin plantation today, but the area of Hope Vale still exists. Even more connections between the Bank of England and Grenada is revealed on Now Grenada website, written by the Grenada National Reparations Committee. They say that throughout the Bank of England's history, Governors Thomas Hankey, John Palmer and Daniel Giles held mortgages for enslaved people in Grenada. Specifically, Governors Hankey Jr. and John Palmer collectively owned 772 enslaved people on this island. The article also says that Ambassador Ali Gill, chairman of the Grenada National Reparations Committee, said, "This exhibit at the Bank of England's museum in London brings home to us now, if we were not aware of it before, the exploitation of Grenada as a colony of Great Britain and its institution, and should intensify our urgent call to action to every Grenadian to join the fight for reparations and reparatory justice for the descendants of enslaved people here in Grenada." What I didn't like about this exhibition was how in each section there was a question. I felt the questions were ridiculous. We don't need discussions around what should or shouldn't have happened. All we need to know are the facts. In place of the questions, they should have had statements. So, for example, does gold contain traces of slavery? The statement should have been, there are traces of slavery in gold. Do you think about where products come from today? These products were at the center of the slave trade. Should we celebrate abolitionists? The long and arduous fight for abolition. Can we tell the history of slavery without the names of the enslaved? Names, history, and language lost through slavery. Did finance shape slavery? Slavery was a financial success which kept it going for centuries. Was compensation needed to end slavery? Slave owners received millions in compensation. How would the UK look without the slave trade? The immense wealth generated through the slave trade shaped Britain. We don't need questions, just the facts. An exhibition such as this is very important because you have people who make you feel that you are not a part of British life. There are some who tell you to go back to your own country. I've had it said to me a number of times when I was growing up. With more transparency, education, knowledge, and the sharing of facts, we drive home that Britain was built on the blood, sweat, and tears of slaves. We are very much a part of the fabric of this country. Slavery is still a hidden history. At one time, they didn't want to talk about slavery at all. A lot of people learned about slavery through the TV show Roots. Since then, we have been thrown scraps of information, but we need the full picture. Yes, it's grim and very upsetting, but it happened, and we need full transparency and honesty. If you don't share the full story, then what you are sharing is a lie. Like the movie Hidden Figures, they didn't want African Americans to know that they were a part of the story of the space race. This was a time of segregation, and it went against the narrative that African Americans are stupid and lazy. So instead, it was kept hidden. The Tax Justice Network website says, a nation that doesn't understand its own history and the roots of its wealth will struggle to understand how power, finance, politics, and economies work. A nation that doesn't understand its past can't understand its present, and how the legacy of slavery and empire remain at the heart of British life today. Some of our families were enriched by it, and some of our families were impoverished and brutalized by it. It is alive in almost every aspect of modern British life you can care to name. One of the more alarming pieces of information I discovered whilst doing research for this video, the 20 million that the government borrowed to pay compensation to slave owners and for the loss of their slaves was only paid off in 2015, which means if you are a descendant of slaves living in the UK and paying your taxes, you have been paying off the debt incurred when the government paid off slave owners who enslaved your ancestors. And how do we know this? The Treasury tweeted about it in 2018. It was a light-hearted, surprising Friday fact, letting us know that we helped the end of the slave trade through our taxes, without even stopping to think that some of those people paying taxes are descendants of slaves. On the Historic England website, they are doing lots of research and reports on the legacy of slavery in the UK. They are doing it from the point of view that certain buildings and places need to be protected and included on the National Heritage List. They recognise that these places exist because of transatlantic slavery. From street names to stately homes, castles, churches, public buildings, town halls, graves belonging to freed slaves, memorials and statues. They are researching and documenting all of this. And they would go on to say, while slavery had no legal basis in England, the law was often misinterpreted. Black people previously enslaved in the colonies overseas and then brought to England by their owners were often still treated as slaves. Some individuals who had formerly been enslaved got baptized, believing this would ensure their freedom. Others took advantage of being on English soil and absconded. Notices for runaway slaves featured in newspapers during this period. That information ties in with case number 13 in the exhibition, which talked about Amelia Lucian or Newsham, who was brought over to the UK as a slave from Jamaica. They didn't bring her over to work, but to tour her around because she was an albino. After she was baptized, she believed she was a free slave and would go on to leave her master and tour herself around. The exhibition said that her story was one of self-determination. It's nice that they would share that story, but whilst a few former slaves managed to carve out some kind of a decent life for themselves, most would not. Most suffered greatly after abolition. Don't forget, slave owners were compensated, not the slaves themselves. Some would die of starvation because they had no one to help them. Some were given land, but usually the worst land that was hard to farm. Those who could farm were usually ripped off when it came to selling their products. Some would stay on with their slave master, working for low pay and living in poor conditions. Some would offer themselves back into slavery. They just couldn't cope with all the challenges out there in the world. Some were called apprentices, basically working for free. The idea around that was to prepare them for freedom. They'd get food and boarding, but no pay, so no way to build up a life for themselves beyond the slave master. As we saw in the exhibition, some were shipped to Sierra Leone, again under this apprenticeship scheme, only to be faced with very poor living conditions and more struggles. Eventually, the apprenticeship scheme was abolished because pressure groups said it was just slavery under a different name. Another thing I found interesting in this exhibition is where it highlighted the close links between slavery and the monarchy. King Charles II was the founder of the Royal African Company, and his brother King James II would become the governor of the Royal African Company. The Royal African Company shipped more African slaves to the Americas than any other company in the history of the transatlantic slave trade. You can see why there has been a persistent call for reparation for descendants of the enslaved. On the BBC News website, I read that earlier this year, in April 2022, the Earl and Countess of Wessex were due to visit Grenada, but cancelled after members of Grenada's Reparations Commission asked to have a conversation with them. They had read an article in the UK Guardian newspaper on this very exhibition. The BBC News website said the Commission is looking for an apology from the British government and from Queen Elizabeth herself for the royal family's role in sanctioning and endorsing the theft of West Africans from their homeland, so they could work in brutal conditions on the sugar plantations of the British Empire. I mentioned before memorials and statues. Most in the UK are for those involved in the abolition of the slave trade, not for the enslaved people themselves. It never occurred to me that there is no major high-profile, permanent memorial to those who suffered as part of the transatlantic slave trade. In my research for this video, I came across this registered charity called Memorial 2007, who are trying to raise 4 million to erect Britain's first national memorial to remember enslaved Africans and their descendants. The memorial statue has already been designed. They have a location marked out in Hyde Park. All they need is the funds to build it, and the government refuses to help with any of the funding. This memorial was debated in Parliament in March 2022, with a government minister saying there are already memorials of the leading figures in the campaign against slavery, including of Thomas Clarkson, who should be remembered alongside Wilberforce. The same government who spent 6 million on the Marble Arch Mound. This was interesting because the exhibition asked, should we celebrate abolitionists? Now, there's nothing wrong with celebrating abolitionists, but we also want the enslaved people themselves to be remembered and commemorated. The people who were brutalized for centuries. So I am fully behind Memorial 2007, and I would like to see it become a reality. If you want to know more about Memorial 2007, please visit their website. So to wrap this up, I'm happy this exhibition exists. It was very interesting looking at the slave trade from a financial and economic point of view. But sad that it only exists because of what happened to George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protest. I would like to see more exhibitions such as this up and down the country, more transparency from organisations and institutions. I get it, people are generally embarrassed about the UK's ties with transatlantic slavery, but it's a history that needs to be told. If British Empire, imperialism and colonialism can be taught in school, then slavery should be taught alongside that. A lot of people who live in the UK today are descendants of slaves. It's our history, and the slave trade played a central role in the expansion and development of the UK. The Slavery and the Bank exhibition said that research is ongoing with many questions to answer and documents to explore. If that is the case, why is this exhibition temporary? Make sure you visit this Slavery and the Bank exhibition at the Bank of England. So thanks for tuning in to my vlog. Please check out the other vlogs on my channel. If you like what you see, please subscribe. If you want to see some of my other videos, just put hashtag KrissMGvlogs into Google and all my videos will come up, as well as my blogs, because I also have a blog. Thanks again for watching today's video, and I'll see you soon.